Hello, thank you for joining us once again at Alpha News. Today we're delighted to be joined in studio by Jeremy Munson, a state representative who's now running for U.S. Congress. Thanks so much for being with us.
Thanks, I'm excited to be here.
Of course, of course. So right off the bat, I want to talk about your run for U.S. Congress in the 1st District down in the south part of Minnesota. Where are we at logistically with this race? I know there was recently a convention, but the GOP failed to attain an endorsement.
Yeah, well, after the death of Jim Hagedorn in February, there was a special election called. So there's going to be a special primary on May 24th, and then the special general will occur on August 9th. The special endorsing convention was going to happen in March, and then it was called off. So the regular endorsing convention for the fall election occurred last weekend, and the delegates are different in the fall election due to the redistricting. So it's complicated, but we had 310 delegates come to Mankato, and I led on every single ballot. There were 7 rounds of ballots. There were 10 candidates running for Congress. I think 8 of them or 7 of them were running for the endorsement, and I was in the lead on every ballot. And in the end, I got about 54% or 55% of the delegates voting for me, but did not reach the 60% threshold. The point that I seek the endorsement to get the support of all the delegates, to get people energized and help out with the race. And we left that convention with a majority of the delegates super enthused about my campaign and ready to help. And we've got people signed up to be door knockers and volunteers for the campaign. So I see the convention as a success, but there wasn't an endorsement.
So I agree. It does seem like it was a success for you. You appear to be the front runner in this race. Moving forward from the convention, how has your strategy changed?
It really hasn't changed too much. I mean, we're not focusing on, half of our time calling delegates, but I'm calling activists and supporters across the district to arrange the same type of meet and greets that I've been doing, because I'm continuing to run a grassroots campaign, meeting with small groups of business leaders, thought leaders, and activists in the areas, getting people out to knock on doors and to lock in those primary votes. Early voting in this race started April 8th. So it's been going on now for several weeks, and we're just trying to get more and more people to vote in the primary. It's the only thing on the ballot is this race. So people don't have to research other races. Just get out and vote for Munson and lock it in. And I think the low voter turnout in the special election primary means if we get 10 to 15,000 votes, I think we're going to win it in a field of 10.
Wow. So tell us what you mean by grassroots campaign. We hear this term thrown around a lot, but what does it mean to you?
Well, it means to me is people are going to get to know the candidate and talk to their neighbors and their friends about who they're going to vote for. This campaign, because it's the special election, a lot of outside special interest groups are looking at this race and deciding this is going to be the first race of the election cycle, and how can they get a win. And so we have these super PACs that are coming into play, and they're mailing in. I went to get my wife's ballot came in the mail yesterday, and it was pancaked between 4 mailers for the same candidate, from 2 special interest groups, so 2 super PACs that are anti-Trump and anti-conservative. And they had, Trump's photo on these mailers, but yet they're against Trump. And so, it's just they send, a mailer with a picture of Nancy Pelosi or Ilhan Omar and some scary words to try to, push you into voting for their candidate. Whereas the grassroots effort is to talking to people, meeting with people, talking about real issues, and having them talk to their friends and neighbors, and spreading the word organically through social media or through going into gas stations where we have a dozen farmers in the back having coffee, and talking to them about the real issues we're dealing with and what I'm going to bring to Washington.
Tell us more about these super PACs. Are they based out in Washington, or are they more local?
No, they're based in Washington. One of them is called Defending Main Street, and this PAC, I'll read on the website. I mean,
I've heard of this one. Defending,
They say the quiet part out loud. They say they're looking for centrist Republicans who are willing to deal with Democrats. They want to stop the noise. They want to stop the screaming, and they want to, they talk about equity and equal pay and a bunch of socialist stuff on this website. And they took out Trump endorsed candidates last cycle, and they're one of the major super PACs that's supporting my opponent, and they're spending hundreds of thousands of dollars, sending tons of mailers. The other one is Americans for Prosperity, which on their website, it sounds like we're alignment on stuff. And I actually went for the endorsement and interviewed with them. And then an article came out last week from a national magazine that said they're only endorsing candidates who are not questioning election integrity in the 2020 election.
Yeah.
So that might have been the deciding factor, but they're supporting my opponent, and which is strange because AFP have some really good points they were pushing. In fact, I have friends that work for them that are flying here from DC to door knock against me in this campaign. So it's again a super PAC that has special interest in mind. They don't want to question the 2020 election results. They don't want to talk about election integrity. They want their special interests supported by their candidate. And so that money comes into play and it can sway voters.
Election integrity, I'm glad you brought it up. It's an important issue. It's a controversial issue. What's the temperature in the water down there in Congressional District 1 on this matter?
Well, it's one of the top issues. I mean, we go and ask people what their main issues are, and theirs is election integrity. In fact, in one of the debates in Albert Lee, I was the last person to speak about the top issues that I'm campaigning on, and everybody stood up and talked about election integrity and how they want to do voter ID and they want to secure our elections. And I got up last and said, look, I understand election integrity is important. None of the candidates up here have fought as hard as I have for election integrity, but it's not a federal issue.
Right.
Amy Klobuchar wants to federalize the elections and mandate perhaps that every county in the country has to use the same voting machine. That's where we actually lose integrity and we create vulnerabilities. The U.S. Constitution requires that the state legislatures set the time, place, and manner of elections. And that means we're going to have every county and state doing something a little different. And that means that nobody can mess with the elections as a whole. That's great. We do need voter ID at the state level. We do need voter ID and provisional ballots to accompany that. And we should get rid of the unmanned drop boxes, but we should not be federalizing the elections. So I talk about the lawsuits I filed against the Secretary of State and challenging that and trying to get the Texas lawsuit with the Supreme Court to include Minnesota. And I signed the Arizona letter to decertify electors where these states were in question. But at a federal level, we shouldn't be federalizing the elections. And but it is a hot issue with people, certainly. And I'm not campaigning to just tell people what they want to hear. I want to work on real issues, and we need to separate what's federal and what's state.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And gosh, unmanned drop boxes, you'd think that would be a no-brainer.
That was a Republican. I mean, Republicans in the Senate actually agreed to it. And I talk about that in the campaign where we have laws in conflict, where we have one law that says you could bring up to 3 ballots for other people to the county election office if you have a signed affidavit saying you have permission. And those are logged. So they know Kyle has brought, to this election cycle, you can't bring any more. But yet we have unmanned drop boxes. And the Senate Republicans agreed to chain them down and put a video camera on the drop boxes, but nobody's going to watch the video. No. And if somebody does see somebody stuffing ballots in there,
how do you know which ballots?
Right.
Yeah.
You've unsecured it anyways, just by having it there. Or they can dump chemicals in there or, jug of water and destroy ballots. So this is a major issue. We have to get rid of the unmanned drop boxes and just require people to drop them off in person or mail them. But this is, we need to fix our elections here in the state, but it's done at the state level.
Yeah, our elections shouldn't be so easy to compromise that you can pour a water bottle into a drop box and screw up a voting station. That's ridiculous. Yeah. On your campaign website, you tout yourself as an America First candidate. This is a very popular position with conservatives. What does it look like to be America First in Minnesota specifically?
Well, one of the biggest issues in the first district is inflation.
Right.
We talk about it. My opponents are saying we're going to stop the Biden-Pelosi inflation. I'm out there saying this is not just Biden and Pelosi. This is Republicans too.
Yeah.
We have inflation because we're $30 trillion in debt, and we've spent $7 or $8 trillion, and we've created in new cash in the last couple of years.
Yeah.
This is why we have inflation. Republicans have been cutting taxes. Democrats have been increasing spending, and they've just agreed to do both and borrow the difference. And we're finally having to pay for that. We need to get this under control. I've been talking about how I will not raise the debt ceiling.
Right.
Okay. $30 trillion is enough. My opponents are out there saying, well, we should never say we're not going to raise the debt ceiling because it's part of a negotiation. And what if we got some great, tax cuts to do it? No,
right.
We can't. We cannot raise the debt ceiling. That's what's killing us. So whether it's gas prices, the energy costs, the inputs for farmers, crop prices, commodity prices are volatile again. We need to fix that, and that means we need to restore some fiscal sanity in D.C. We need somebody that's actually going to be reining in spending, cutting parts of the government, and not raising the debt ceiling. That's really important. So in protecting the U.S. dollar, making America first again, and restoring energy independence, that's a really big issue. We need to be a net exporter of energy, not buying fuel from outside the country, and not buying the components for green energy stuff from developing nations, where we're poisoning the earth in doing so. The way we dismantle and recycle renewable energy products is abhorrent, and the slavery that's involved in the supply chain is just not something we should be forcing taxpayers to fund slavery.
Yeah. I was reading something recently related. China is now overtly stealing patented windmill materials and manufacturing them, and then American companies or governments that want to buy windmills are going to China to buy the exact same product for cheaper, shirking the American company that was robbed of their intellectual property. It's really egregious. Speaking of farmers, there's a lot of farming in the first district, of course. What are your plans to, reduce the cost of those inputs and to deal with what some people are describing as an impending food shortage?
Yeah, it's important to know that, I'm a small government guy, so I'm always pushing back on government regulations and mandates. For farming, there's three things that I believe are a national security issue. That's food, water, and energy.
Yeah, makes sense.
And for those reasons, government has a role in regulating those industries. And so there's certain regulations we put on farmers in exchange for subsidies that we provide them to make sure that we can secure our food supply. And that may include that at some point we would prevent them from shipping all their food to China if they want to buy it all. But we need to control our inputs. And one of the things we need to do is a fertilizer. We need to secure that supply chain. And that means bringing things home. A lot of manufacturing we need to bring home. Most of the manufacturing was pushed overseas because of the cost of labor and because of environmental restrictions here. And we need to be honest with ourselves. If environmental restrictions are pushing these jobs overseas, aren't we just pushing them to areas that don't have environmental restrictions at all? And aren't we just poisoning the earth over there, or creating smog in the planet somewhere else? And that's not solving the problem. We need American ingenuity to do things better, bring those jobs home, give them an incentive to manufacture cleaner or better. But what we need to bring security to our supply chain, and for farming, that means fertilizer. And other chemical inputs that they use that are important for growing these massive bounties that feed the world.
Turning now to coronavirus, of course, a topic we have to cover. I saw on your website that putting Fauci behind bars is an objective of your campaign. Tell us a little bit about your opinion on Fauci, and how do you think Republicans in Washington should be dealing with him at the present moment?
Well, we need to rein him in. I can't believe that Fauci is out there still talking about how maybe we're switching from pandemic to endemic. Like, he needs to go away. He needs to be held accountable for his actions, and he needs to be put in jail. He needs to be held accountable for lying to the American public and causing what may be more deaths from the government's response to COVID than to just let it go, follow the same playbook that we've had in place for 100 years. In all the special interest groups that are tied to that, and all the massive corporations that have profited on the government's response to COVID, that needs to be exposed. We need to have massive audits on all the funding that was thrown out at companies that have asked for it. But Senator Rand Paul endorsed me last weekend, and he said, we need Munson to come to DC so we can put Fauci in jail. We need to hold people accountable, and that just means going through everything that he did, all the flip-flopping he did on things, and making sure he's held accountable.
These are not radical positions at all. Auditing Fauci, energy independence, making sure our elections are safe and secure. Yet some Republicans shirk away from these ideas, from these concepts. If you succeed in making it to Washington, how will you relate to Republicans that might be less open to these ideas?
Look, government's broken. Washington, D.C. is broken. It's been corrupted by outside special interest groups. And I've been always willing to have a bold and honest conversation with people about the dysfunction of government, about the special interest groups' influence, about big pharma, their influence in the FDA's decision, right? We have to question, is the FDA actually protecting patients, or is the FDA protecting pharmaceutical companies? And having those bold conversations, we need a change in direction. We don't just need to nibble around the edges. People are so upset about critical race theory in our schools and the indoctrination of our kids and what's going on with these policies. And I've taken the position that I want to abolish the Federal Department of Education.
Really?
It should not be at the federal government. It should be at the state and maybe in the local level specifically. Parents and teachers and faculty should come together and set the curriculum for their schools. It should not be some federal mandate where all the schools have to be doing the same thing. And that's where you get the national teachers unions and everything else lobbying for all these mandates. And it takes so long to make a change. And if we allow local schools to innovate and do things different to respond to the needs of their community, this is where we come up with experimentation and deciding what policies are going to work best and how kids can succeed. And then we can have other schools look to that, and we create competition. And whether that's at the state level, allowing school choice, allowing the money to follow the student into whether they want to go to private school or not, that would create great competition, and that would have a very fast course correction for our public schools. You would not see public schools pushing these crazy policies that are infuriating parents if the parent could easily just take that $11,000 or $18,000 or $24,000 a year and go to a private school with that same money.
It's really a very similar position you have to the voting issue. If you federalize a system and it's uniform and that system fails, it fails everywhere. But if you have a system that has diversity of function across multiple jurisdictions, then one can succeed, another can fail, and at least the entire system hasn't collapsed.
I'm taking notes for my campaign. That's really good.
Thank you. It seems like you have a bit of a libertarian bent. You want to remove power from the federal government. Am I understanding you properly?
Yeah, I mean, I'm for limited government.
Yes,
I mean, I tell people when I ran for state house, that was actually what I put on my campaign signs: Munson for less government. People say, "What are you running for?" It doesn't matter. For less government. But I mean, so people call that a libertarian bent. I mean, I'm a constitutional conservative.
Okay.
I believe in restoring the principles of our founding fathers and what government should be doing. Every bill that hits my desk, I ask, is it constitutional? Does it grow government? Is there a better, more like a private solution to this? And then the easiest question is, are we actually going to achieve the results that we're setting out to do? Like this bill is well-intentioned, but is it actually going to do this? Is it, if it's not enforceable and it's not going to work, then we shouldn't be growing government in doing this. So I support limited government, first and foremost, and following the Constitution. And for that reason, I am one of the most conservative legislators in the state, but I also work on issues of civil liberties and stand up for the First Amendment and free speech on college campus and a lot of other issues that reach across the aisle, especially when it comes to pushing for transparency and accountability in government and in lobbying reform.
On a personal level, what motivated you to make this run to U.S. Congress? Because you're an impactful legislator here in Minnesota. Why make the jump?
Well, I was working on several issues at the state level, price transparency in healthcare. I got a few things done on that. I really wanted to change our policy around healthcare to protect the private healthcare market, and so much of that is driven by federal policy.
Right.
It's Medicare, Medicaid, and some national stuff that comes in. I want to allow pharmaceuticals to be re-imported from any country because that's how we're going to lower the cost of pharmaceuticals. Pharmaceuticals are manufactured elsewhere. When we talk about lowering the cost of healthcare, a lot of it is, well, the doctors or the hospitals have to make less in order to lower the cost. But for pharmaceuticals, they're manufactured elsewhere. They're not in my district. And they're becoming increasingly a larger percentage of the cost of care. Sometimes 30 or 40% of your entire cost of care are these pills. Okay. Why are they so expensive? And why are they cheaper in other countries? Because they set price caps? Because we should be able to re-import them from other countries. But that's a federal issue. We can kind of do it at the state level, but if we did it at a federal level, it would drastically lower our cost of care. We would stop subsidizing the rest of the world. And this is something that I want to tackle in Congress.
Of course, yeah. So it seems like moving to Congress is just a natural extension of what you've already been advocating here at the state level.
Yeah.
All right. Moving forward, what are going to be some key aspects of your campaign that we see?
I mean, when I go out and meet with farmers, people ask me, are you going to be on the ag committee, or what are the big issues for farmers? And I'm like, you know what? Most farmers are dealing with the really high cost of care, healthcare costs, energy costs.
The same issues that impact all the rest of us?
The same issue. In fact, most farmers, when we talk about the actual farming operation, they're upset because they're being inundated by more regulations from the EPA and in outside of the Department of Ag. All of these federal agencies are trying to over-regulate farmers and putting, there's like a war on ag on trying to push them to be, like 1800s farmers and growing, non-GMO corn when, 2 billion people in the world would die if they switched.
Why do you think that push exists? Do you think it's well-meaning people that are approaching it from the wrong angle, or do you think it's maybe as malicious as it looks?
No, I think it's mostly from people that don't understand farming.
Okay.
They need to come out and watch us, produce crops in the manner that we do, understand how we're trying. And every new farmer is trying to use the least amount of inputs possible because it's expensive.
Yeah.
We're not just throwing nitrogen out there to grow crops. We're doing, this is least amount of nitrogen as possible, pushing it right on the seed, right on the seed bed, and not just throwing it willy-nilly across the whole field. Everything is done intentionally to lower the input costs, and that means we're reducing all the chemicals that are going to growing, and we need to get an enormous yield, and that means precision planting, variable spacing in the rows. I mean, everything that we're doing out there, people need to see what goes into a farming operation and how this big machinery is put into use. There's a push to have tractors electrified. That's just not going to work. So the push to green energy, people need to have a step back and understand how we use our energy and where electricity comes from and how load-based energy is important, not just solar or some intermittent stuff, and really understand how it works in rural Minnesota and where our energy needs are and how we grow food.
I've never lived on a farm, but that seems very intuitive, that farmers are self-interested too, and fertilizer is expensive. And wasting it and destroying the land that they make their livelihood from would be counterproductive. And when people accuse them of doing that, it doesn't seem like it makes a lot of sense.
Right, and farmers are really good stewards of their land.
Right.
If you plow the land in the fall, which was a trend that came back again, and the wind comes through and blows all your topsoil away, you don't have good soil.
Right.
You have to protect your soil for every year's inputs, and this means farmers are going to take really good care of their land. The same thing with water. I drink the water underneath my house. Right. I have a well, so I'm not going to poison my land.
Right.
And everybody that lives in rural Minnesota does the same thing. We have an interest in protecting our land, in our water, and that people just need to understand that.
Where do you think this narrative came from, that farmers are, evil corporatists that love poisoning the earth? Because it's so pervasive in big cities, and you always hear it from Washington, but I don't understand where the origins of that might even be.
Just a gross misunderstanding. The same thing with high density feedlots for animals. People think that pigs need to be out romping around in the woods to be healthy, and putting them in a confined pen where we can monitor them and the temperature, and they're well fed and clean. This is where the animals are best taken care of. I mean, they're our food, right? We have to be honest about that too.
Right. We need to grow a lot of them so we can all have bacon in the morning. It's very simple. It's very simple. So we've covered a wide range of topics today, ranging from coronavirus to farming to everything in between. Is there anything else that you want to add that we didn't address so far?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people ask, well, my background and my day job. So, I worked in finance, I've worked in real estate. In fact, I've worked in regulatory compliance for financial service firms for 10 years. When we moved to the district, my wife grew up in southern Minnesota. She grew up in the 1st District where we live. And I grew up in central Minnesota. But when we moved there, she wanted to farm. And so her parents farm. They run a decent sized row crop operation. They grow corn and soybeans. And so I worked for them full time for 2 years.
Wow.
So you may not see it here when I'm wearing a suit, but I've been working in pig barns, sweeping out grain bins and hauling corn, driving truck and delivering to the ethanol plant. But throughout these 2 years, we built a business plan to understand how we're going to get into farming, how we're going to make a run at this. And so I know very well the input costs of your land and the cost of your machinery and how the commodity markets work, and playing on the board and understanding how to make your operation work. I understand the risks that farmers go through. And every year, some farmers are going to put their whole lives into this and not make money for 2 or 3 years. Sometimes they do well. I understand the tax codes too, which is another issue farmers talk to me about a lot, is how the accelerated depreciation works, or the changes that Congress puts on them at the last minute. And farmers want consistency, and there's subsidies out there that some farmers may support going away over the long term, but you can't pull the rug out from underneath them. And that's the biggest thing that I will fight for farmers is consistency in making sure we don't change the rules for them halfway through, and to understand how everything Congress does can impact their inputs, especially in trade policy. So I'm intimately familiar with the operation of the farm. And every Sunday when we get together with the extended family, I get lobbied by farmers. So I understand, personally how they're impacted by things that are being proposed in Congress.
Right. That makes a lot of sense. One thing, it's a bit of a tangent. You mentioned ethanol, and you've talked about energy independence. How does that work? Because I've seen conflicting opinions on ethanol. Some people are saying, why are we burning our food supply? Other people are saying this is a good idea. What's your take on ethanol?
Well, I mean, the Democrats they talk about green energy, they talk about ethanol and how it's great, but they also talk about getting rid of combustion engines. Right. So you can't have it both.
Right.
I think that ethanol has been obviously been an economic boost for our area.
Yeah.
It gives a great opportunity for farmers to have two different destinations for their corn, either to sell for feed or to sell for ethanol. And then the ethanol, the DDGs, or the spent grains that are left over, they can also use for feed. I think it's just maybe 30% of the corn is used for making ethanol. The rest can be still used for feed. But it's, I think ethanol is important. I think biodiesel is important. I doubt it's going away anytime soon, but it has to be part of our package of energy that we continue to use.
This makes sense. If people want to keep up with your campaign, get involved, where can they go to find more resources?
Yeah, you can go out to jeremymunson.com and learn about my positions, get involved with the campaign, volunteer. You can obviously donate. And then on Facebook, you can look up Representative Jeremy Munson and follow the Facebook page where I post a lot of the information and links. I'm also on Twitter at Jeremy Munson.
Awesome. Representative, thanks so much for being with us.
Thanks.